Hey there, welcome to Angular After Dark. Today we're going to be adding the Lumberjack logging library to an existing Angular application. Yeah, we're After Dark. Today we're always messing this up. We'll be looking at using Lumberjack in practice. We'll be adding it to the Two of Heroes tutorial application from the Angular IO website. So let's jump straight into that. I prepared this fresh workspace and I added the Two of Heroes application to it. Most likely you're familiar with this application. If not, let's fire it up for a second. So we have just one project in this workspace, Two of Heroes application. There's the regular serve and the production serve. Let's just use the regular serve. And it should be firing up. Hopefully it is. Nice. Let's find it. Localhost 4200. Look at this. This is the Two of Heroes application with the top heroes being the NG workers who created this library: Nacho Vasquez, Serkan Sipahi, Santosh Yadav, and me, Lars Brink. And as we can see here, this Two of Heroes application already has like a logging UI. So we can clear it. We can go to heroes here, and it says hero service fetch the heroes. And if we go to details, it'll say hero service fetch the hero with ID 11. Back to the dashboard, and it fetched the heroes again. There's no caching built in, so it'll do a new request for each page. So there's two things we could do here. We could get rid of this messages logging UI and just add a backend where the logs will be sent instead. But we could also hook into, like, do a custom log driver for Lumberjack so that messages are both logged to the server, the backend, and still displayed in this UI, because that's one of the convenience features that Lumberjacks allows, is adding multiple log drivers so that you can output in the console and maybe in the UI and send it to a backend, and we can filter it based on the logging level. Let's jump into this code base and see what we have. Here is the messages component. Nothing inside the component model except it's using this message service. In the template, we see that it's looping through each service inside of this, or each message inside of this message service. And there's a button to call the clear method. The message service is down here, and it just adds an array of the logged messages, and those will be displayed in the UI. And let's see who's using this message service, which component. Let's go to we can use this code lens and see who's injecting it. It's the hero service. So yet another service here, hero service. So where is the message service being used in this hero service? Let's go down here and see. Oh, so that it actually has its own log method that calls the message service and adds the prefix of hero service. And this is being used in 9 different locations throughout this hero service. So we saw some of these log messages before: fetched heroes, fetched hero with the ID, whatever, and a few others here for searching, adding, deleting, updating a hero. And yeah, I guess that's it. So how would we add Lumberjack, the new logging library, to this application? Let's shut down this sub. I guess we don't have to. Yeah, now I did it anyways. I suck. Okay, so we do have an ng-add schematic. So let's close all of this down. And we'll do ng-add, ng-worker, if I can spell today, / lumberjack. Hey, Beeman, thank you for coming. And this will fetch the latest version, which is 2.0.1. You definitely want to be on a version 2.x. It's the stable one we spent months stabilizing, improving, future-proofing. And now we have the beginning of an ecosystem with the two built-in log drivers for the console and the HTTP backend, and one for Azure Application Insights provided by the community, and one for the Google Firestore. So now ng-add, it added this package, Lumberjack. Computer is really slow today. Yeah, here we go. It added Lumberjack. That's what we expected. It used pnpm in this case to download it as well, since that was set up in our Angular JSON config. And it went ahead and added something to app module to register Lumberjack. So let's see here what we got. It added this Lumberjack module for root, and it added the Lumberjack console driver module for root. So this means we're using the default configuration for these two. But we do actually have some options to configure it. Let's look at that. So we have format, and that's where you can switch out the implementation for the formatted log, which is used by the console driver to turn it into a string, because each log is a log object. But the console driver will turn it into a string, and if you're not happy with the default formatting, you can replace it with your own function here for that. And I guess the type for it is somewhere here in Lumberjack. Search for format, Lumberjack format function. So that should be the type for this one. I think it's, let's see, it should accept the log, which is a Lumberjack log, and it should return a string. So we could like do anything here if we wanted to customize that. So we could do log, and then we have all of these 5 properties. 2 of them are optional, so they might be there, they might not be there. We need to take that into account. But anyways, we'll stay happy with the default formatting for now. The other option here is the levels. So this is where we can filter out on the global scope, like on the root level, which log levels do we want to pass into our log drivers. And for this, we'll need this Lumberjack level. And now we can specify we want critical, we want error, and we want info. Yeah, so this would be on the global level. We would say these are the only levels we want to pass to our log drivers by default. But then again, we could configure it even on the log driver level. So we could say Well, for the browser console, we want all of them. How would you say that in Lumberjack? Well, we could list all of them, of course, or we could use the verbose setting. That means bring me all of the logs. So now, if we register more log drivers, they will use this global setting by default, and the console driver will allow all log levels to be passed to it. And if there's any more options for the console driver here, no, there's not. There's an optional option called identifier. That's actually for a possible future feature. You don't really need to know about that, so let's just ignore that. We do have one more driver that comes with Lumberjack. That's the HTTP driver for a simple web API backend. Obiman is saying, let's add an emoji to be to be hipster. An emoji to what? For the formatting function. Yeah, okay, let's try to do that later once we have everything set up. We'll try to customize the formatting to add an emoji. And hello, all knows. Welcome to the show. Okay, so we could add this HTTP driver ourselves here. Say, let's go up here and see our imports, because most of Lumberjack is in this root level namespace, ng worker Lumberjack, but we actually split the two drivers into separate namespaces. So here we have the console driver, and similar to that, we have HTTP driver namespace, so that if you're not using them, they will definitely not be imported into your app, and it's a bit easier to figure out what's related to what in here. And so we do have a Lumberjack HTTP driver module as well, and that's what we need to import here in our app module if we wanted to activate that driver. So we could use for root, like we did with the console driver module, but we have another convention here, which is with options, and that's when you want to use the global options for the properties that are in common, like the levels, but the driver has some specific options that are exclusive to this driver. So we'll try this with options. And here we see we have an origin. That could be two of heroes application. And we have some other options, to retry options. There are some default options, of course, but here we could say we want, let's say, 250 milliseconds between each retry if it fails to send the log to the server. And we want to retry, let's say, 4 times maximum. We do have to specify all the options here, at least the ones that are required. So we need a store URL, and that's the URL for our backend. And now, maybe Beeman can help me. When we were on the BLS live stream, we used sort of a testing backend on the web. Maybe you can remind me what that was called, because I don't have that backend set up. Well, I guess Two of Heroes has an in-memory web API, and I think we might have struggled a bit with that on the BLS live stream as well. You're saying it's called hook bin. Okay, I'm trying to set that up. Let me find that. Create a new endpoint. Okay, so we'll just use this endpoint for our HTTP driver. So that's all we need to activate the HTTP driver. There is another option when we did ng-add, we could have specified HTTP driver, and it would have set up a basic configuration for us. We can also say HTTP driver false, but that's also the default. We also have an option for the console driver that will be enabled by default, but we could leave it out by specifying false. But we'll do this. Are we happy with these levels? Yeah. Well, maybe we also want the warning levels to be passed in by default. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so we'll add Lumberjack for register Lumberjack because we need to use the Lumberjack API in our app to actually use it. Now everything's registered and configured, so that should be good. Okay, so you're using Hookbin, Beeman. Thank you for reminding me. It's not something I do on a regular basis. Okay. Pretty sure this in-memory database thingy was giving us trouble when we were on BLS, so we'll probably have to disable that at some point. Yeah. So remind me of that if I'm wondering why it doesn't work. Okay, so we had the message service that was being used by the hero service. So this was the only place in this application where something was logged. Unless they're using console, that's something only for the errors. Okay. Well, we could hook into that as well. And the only other places in the main file, but we don't have Lumberjack at this point, so we can't use it here. But we can actually use it for error handling. Let's see. Well, we do have an error severity level, first of all. And if one of the log drivers fails, Lumberjack will turn that into an error log and pass it to the stable log drivers, the ones that are not failing. So it does have some error handling built in. So it will, yeah, basically the failing log driver won't be receiving the logs, but the other log drivers will be notified of the failing log driver, and they will continue to receive the logs. This could be it could be temporary that it's failing, so Lumberjack will keep trying every time there's a new log. But for the one that's failing, it will be logged as an error to the other drivers. Hello, Andres. Hey, photos. What do you mean? Okay, so where we want to add Lumberjack is in this hero service probably, but yeah, I'm little like Lumberjack has 6 logging levels. This one just says log and message. So maybe we should look into what would the logging levels be of these different logging methods here. Where is this being used? Let's say find all the references. And let's look at the first one here. Okay, so this is when heroes were fetched from the backend. Oh, hey folks. Hello. That was probably autocorrect. Okay, so fetching heroes. I mean, what is that? Like, is it an info or is it just a debug or trace? It could be either one. It's definitely not an error. It's not a critical, and it's not a warning. So it'll be trace or info or debug. What do you think? Which level should this one have? Well, let's go with info. This one is either fetched or did not find for a specific hero. Okay. Let's also go with info. Here we are logging fetched a hero. That would also be info. This one, either it will be found heroes matching a search term or no heroes matching a search term. So let's also just go with info for now for simplicity. Oh, okay. Beeman is suggesting we use the trace level because the console driver is using the trace command from the console. Yeah, well, I did filter out trace for the global config, I guess not for the console driver. But if we want to hook it into that UI, the messages, we would definitely need to add that trace back then in our config. Let's do that. Okay. So, well, let me tell you about the default config for Lumberjack. If we deleted all this, what would we get? Let's use the default. In development mode in an Angular app, we would see all the log levels for all the log drivers. And Andres is happy to see Beeman and wants to have a look at Lumberjack. Well, welcome. I hope you like what you see. We're happy to receive any feedback. And your keyboard is messing with your spelling again. Sorry. But that's all right. Okay, so if we use the default config and we remove this one as well, in development mode, we would see all the log levels passed to all the log drivers. In production mode, it would filter out the trace and the debug log levels. And yeah, that's the default, but you can configure that yourself. Let's leave them all on for now. When we're in development mode, we'll see all of them. That's the default. So yeah, let's just do that, and then we can go back and say we want it to be trace. Let's just search and replace. Info will become trace. Okay. Where did we get to? This one is trace. This one is trace. This one. Here's the logging. Added a hero with an ID. Let's also do trace for that one. Here we have deleted. Let's also do a trace. And where's the logging? Updated the hero with this ID. That will also become a trace. And this is an error. Okay, so it will log it to the console using the error operation. And then it will log it. So we will turn these two into a single call to Lumberjack with an error level logging. Error. So we will fix this to do a better job of transforming errors for user consumption and send the error to the remote logging infrastructure. We will also take care of that, but we don't need two separate commands. We'll be using just one API of Lumberjack for this. Okay, so now we have an overview of all the logs in this application. And right now it's going through this log method. What happened with Angular? So we have opened up the Two of Heroes tutorial application from Angular.io, and now we're trying to add the Lumberjack logging library from the Ng Workers open source team that I'm part of. And we will replace this client-side logging with Lumberjack, so that we're also sending to the backend, logging to the console, and maybe even also logging to the existing UI. Let's see if we still have it open here somewhere. Yeah, it has this logging component right here. And we have this mock backend where we should see the logs being sent to once we hook up everything. Yeah, so that's what's going on with Angular Digisoft. Okay, so how would we go around this? Okay, so Lumberjack has a few APIs. I think we ended up having all of these as trace. So one way we could do this is we could go for import from ng worker Lumberjack. There's a bunch of stuff in here. We could go for the Lumberjack service. That's the low-level imperative API. Let's see how that works. So we need the constructor here, and we'll inject it as a dependency. Private Lumberjack service. You could find the log method somewhere here. There it is. And we could say this.lumberjack.log. And now we need to pass it a log object. And so we need to create a that timestamp. And if we want full testability, we actually need another dependency here. That's the Lumberjack time service, like so. Oh, I should add it to the constructor. Private Lumberjack time. Now we can do this .lumberjack time get Unix epoch ticks. So the other properties. Okay, Digisoft is asking, can we use Ionic with Angular application for making a website? Yeah, Ionic is using web components, so you can use it for a hybrid hybrid mobile app or a website as well, although it's primarily for handheld devices like mobiles and tablets, the design and layout of the components. But yeah, you can. It's web components, so you can use it on a regular website, or just host the app as a web app on a URL on the internet. But today it's not about Ionic. This log object, the next one is this level. So now we need a Lumberjack level, and we can't pass verbose here. That's only for configuration. And if we do, TypeScript will get mad. So that's good. We tried to get like a very strong typing for this library. Okay, so let's say now that everything is a trace level message. Yeah, we have that from this argument. or parameter, and we don't have a payload. And do we have a scope? Yeah, we actually do. This is the scope, hero service. It's a string. Payload is whatever we would like to ship to, for example, to the backend. We don't have anything here, but we could add whatever we wanted, any metadata about the user or the session or the Angular version or the theme they're using, whatever we want to measure in our logs. Yeah, so now we have actually replaced this one. I mean, by leaving out this message service, now the UI, the logging UI, this part will not be working anymore. But we will try to add a custom log driver for that after we see that all this works. Yeah, okay, so now we already have an issue actually, because one of these uses was an error, right? This one. But if we use the log service or method, it will be a trace level. So I guess we should be doing it like so. Lumberjack log level, which makes so that it doesn't accept the verbose setting or level, because that's for configuration. But then we have to go and add the trace or the error level to all the uses. So let's see how annoying this gets. So log, this is the message. Now we need trace. Good. And log. Back level trace. It's already getting pretty tedious to do this. Lumberjack level trace. Happy now. Thank you. And same here. Lumberjack level trace. Okay. Digisoft, I don't want app, I just want to design website with Angular and Ionic 5. Okay, well, just be aware that the Ionic components are mostly oriented towards mobile and tablet devices, so they might feel like a mobile app on desktop. So Angular material is more something in between. But of course, Ionic probably has some components that are not included with Angular material. There's a lot of other options out there, though. So, yeah, consider other options based on your needs. And Andres, you're asking you would like to see how to test a service which uses Lumberjack. Okay, maybe not today. I think this is going to take a while just getting everything set up in this app, because it does have an existing log system we want to replace. But some other day, I'll be happy to show you. Lumberjack level trace. Same here. Now we can delete this comment, this one, and go to the next place. Lumberjack level trace. Delete the comment. Same here. Lumberjack level trace. Delete the comment. And here we are again. Delete the comment and lumberjack level trace. And here we finally have the error. Lumberjack level error. Yeah. And this one actually says send it to the remote logging infrastructure. Well, we're actually doing this now because we have the HTTP driver activated. So we just need to verify that they end up where they're supposed to. So now this will be an error log and do a better job of transforming error for user consumption. Well, I guess this is where we could add a custom formatting function. We could like make the errors stand out differently from the other ones. But yeah, let's see how it looks. Okay, that's it. We'll leave this one here. To add custom log driver for messages component. Like so. Okay. Does all of this look right? Yeah, just wanted to tell you that we could just pass in a new date here and say value of. That would, because this one is expecting a number, which is the number of milliseconds since the 1st of January in 1970, the Unix epoch. And this is the time the log object was created, not when it was sent to the server. Because that could be later. Your driver could be batching logs. So what's important is when did this event occur. But like I said, for testability purposes, you would want to use the Lumberjack time service, because then you could control the time that this returns, no matter which testing framework you're using. Like Jest recently got support for, it integrated the Xenon fake timers setup. So now it's actually pretty relatively straightforward to control all the times in your application, all the new dates, for example. But that's specifically for Jest. We needed a solution that was framework agnostic. So it would work both in Karma, Jasmine, or Jest, or whatever you're using. Okay, so let's see here. I guess we changed configuration here. Use default logging levels. And now for the hero service, we are now using the Lumberjack service, the low-level API of Lumberjack. Use Lumberjack service for logs. And let's start it up. I can boost this computer, but you might hear a slight noise in the background. So let's just wait for a second, then it shouldn't be too much of a deal. As you can see here now, it's passing Lumberjack through the NGCC, the Angular Compatibility Compiler, and that's one of the things we're actively testing with Lumberjack, that it works well with the Angular Compatibility Compiler and every version of Angular from 9.0 to 11.2 currently. So all of those versions are supported by Lumberjack 2. So what will be important is which versions of Angular is your log driver supporting. The built-in ones support the same versions of Angular as Lumberjack, but for example, the Azure application inside the log driver, I think it only supports Angular 11 because the application insights API that it itself is using only supports a recent version of TypeScript. So yeah, there lies the limitation. But the log driver is just concerned about supporting Lumberjack 2.x. So it's more a question of what does your log driver support, which versions of Angular. Lumberjack is trying to support as many as possible, and then we can roll out features across versions of Angular, which is pretty neat. Okay, so the application should have started by now. Hey there, Angular After Dark. So now the messages are gone. Let me just refresh for good measure. And what we should see, okay, failed after 4 retries. All this Zone.js and RxJS. Let's see if we can. This is I don't see any of our own code here, or Lumberjack's code, but this is coming from. Remember, we set up maximum 4 retries for the HTTP driver, so it failed with that endpoint, which is a little bit strange because it's sending a post request JSON, and it should send whatever, and this endpoint should be able to accept that. Oh well, what about the console? Okay, so now we're seeing here trace, this timestamp with the Unix UTC offset, or sorry, the UTC offset of 0 hours, this scope hero service, and the message fetched heroes. And undefined means that there was no payload added to this log. And trace shows us that this was called from the Lumberjack console driver, line 66. Okay. What else could we do? We could click a hero. And now we see more of this. I don't know why we didn't see that here. But now we're seeing it was from it came through the Lumberjack console driver, which was going through a bunch of methods inside of the Lumberjack package, and then it came from the hero service, this line. Yeah, that's where our code here. So this is pretty neat. We can see exactly where this message was logged from through the trace logging level in our console driver. And now I know why it's failing. It's that in-memory web API thingy. You should have reminded me of that. I told you I would forget. Oh, okay. So let's try to disable that. We don't have any pending changes, no. So in-memory DB should be here in the app module. Let's just disable it. Now let's try to use the app again and see if it can successfully send a log to the server. We might want to have the console open at the same time. So let's try this detail route. 404 not found. An error. This is the error level. HTTP failure response for this one. I guess it didn't send something here then. What could we do? Heroes. API heroes not found. Can we do anything? Oh, here we go. Okay. So it did send some logs, at least this one. So this is what the log object sent in the request to the API when using the HTTP driver from Lumberjack. This is the object you're getting. The formatted log, that's the one you're seeing also in the console driver with all of this. The origin, which is the Tour of Heroes application, which we configured, and then the full log object. This is what was logged from our code in the hero service. The created at timestamp, the logging level, which was error, the message, which was get heroes failed, HTTP failure response for whatever API heroes, and then the scope, the hero service. So this was a log from hero service. It was an error log at this time. And this was the message. Okay, great. So we saw this in the backend now, and we got the same one here in the console, the browser console. Great. So Lumberjack is now working. Of course, I disabled the in-memory web API, so now we can't get any data, but whatever, we're interested in logging right now. So what could we do at this point? Well, I could show you how, like, the preferred way of dealing with logs in Lumberjack, because this is a bit messy and very low level. We would like to be a bit more declarative and structured. So I think we'll do that first. But first, there's a comment here from Musamil. Welcome to the stream. You're asking where to start if someone is new to TDD or end-to-end testing. Okay. So end-to-end testing, well, that's one of the ways of automated testing. In Angular, that means booting up the whole application and then testing it through the browser, whereas test-driven development is on the unit test level and integration test. Because one of the things about end-to-end test, they test a lot more of your code, but they don't really help you with designing the code and architecting the code. And especially they don't tell you where something is wrong. They just tell you something is wrong. This test is failing, but it probably won't tell you where in the code it's failing. So you're going to need unit test for that. So, I mean, you're mentioning TDD here, so I guess you are familiar with what it is. But just in a nutshell, it's you always write a test before any code. So you write enough test so that, you write enough test to get a failing test. Then you implement the code so that that part of the test passes. For example, if you were creating a new hero object in your test, well, now you need a hero object in your code, so you'll implement that. Okay, now the test is passing or it's compiling. What's the next step? Well, you want a hero service. Okay, now you need to implement the hero service. And after that goes well, now you want the hero service that add hero. And what should happen then? Well, it should send the request to the server or whatever. So it's a step-by-step incremental implementation driven by the tests. So the test will drive the design. So you'll get usually get a nice modular design for your code, because code that is testable most of the times it has a nicer design than code that is just written to work. So you're asking where to start with TDD. Well, it's a general discipline, not specifically related to Angular. But the thing about Angular is there's so many different classes and concepts, and they have to be tested in very specific ways. So I definitely wouldn't recommend beginning with TDD and testing Angular at the same time. I would recommend you would master Angular testing first, and for that you could see. Let's see here. Like talks with Santosh. That's a YouTube show with my friend Santosh Yadav from India. And not too long ago, I had a testing in Angular session with him. That's 2.5 hours. And it has a slideshow presentation of 100 slides and answers some community questions. And among the things that I do is we basically start from the basics here. So if you're just getting into testing, there's like the first half an hour is about fundamentals of testing, and specifically also what are the many different, what should you learn about testing, and then comes what is an end-to-end test, and what does a test look like, and what are the different types of testing in Angular. And that's what's important, because there's 50 different types of tests in Angular. So that's what you should master first, in my opinion. So I'll add a link to that here right now in the chat. So you can go watch that. Other than that, well, so there's two things here you should master, and that's testing, how to test in Angular, because you have to interact with the test bed unless it's an end-to-end test. And the other thing is TDD in general. And once you have an idea about both those concepts, you can combine them and try to figure out how do I do test-driven development with Angular. So it's a progress that involves several steps. So master Angular testing, or get a good idea about how to do all the tests, and then read up on some content about test-driven development. There is a book, probably by Kent Beck. It's an old one, but still one of the best ones. Test-driven development. This one. How old is this today? Can we see that? Where is it? Where is it? 2002. So almost 20 years, but like this is still explaining the concepts of test-driven development. It's the same concepts today that you have to learn. So this is the URL for that, or just Google test-driven development by Kent Beck. So those are my recommendations. I think the only person that has, well, there's a few blog posts, but the one who has done most in the space of Angular and testing and TDD would be Shai Resnick. So you could also look for his content, but he's running a business, so you might find a few talks from conferences, but he's running some workshops that are paid if you want to like learn from an expert in Angular, an expert in testing. He would be a good candidate. And the other one is Younes. He's also doing Angular testing workshops. Can't remember his last name right now. It's Jihadi or something like that. But yeah, look him up as well. He's an Angular GDE. He's also doing a lot of workshops about Angular testing. Okay, I hope that answers your question satisfactory. Now let's get back to Lumberjack. What we're doing here, we were disabling this in-memory API, okay? And now we could look at, we'll implement this custom driver later, but first we'll look at how to structure your logs using Lumberjack. Okay, you have a follow-up question here. Oh, this was from another person. Testing is important. I feel like unit testing itself is overkill, isn't it? End-to-end test makes sense. Well, that, like, if that's your testing strategy, that you like to do end-to-end tests, so be it. One doesn't rule the other one out. It's more about what can unit test do for me and what can end-to-end test do for me. You wouldn't want to test every nook and cranny of your application using end-to-end test. That would simply be too overwhelming, too slow to run, and too much work to implement. And some things might not even be possible. So that's where unit tests shine, because you can isolate one or two or a few classes and test them together. And then you build up on that, like bricks for a house. You say this block of code is working, and this block of code is working, and the next one, and so on. And in the end, you have a house where you know that each piece is working. Of course, then comes integration test, where, well, this whole wall is working with the piping for the water and the heats and electricity and so on. And then comes the end-to-end test. Well, can I live in the whole house? Can I enter the door? Can I open a tap and water is running, and so on? So it's kind of the same approach here. You are verifying different things. Like, if you really wanted to be absolutely certain, you would have to run an end-to-end test in the production environment. Otherwise, you wouldn't be testing for how the application works in the actual production environment. So yeah, let's set up a testing strategy about how do you want to test in your project. And Musamil, you're saying thank you. Well, thank you for asking. It's one of my favorite topics. So I could talk about this all day. But let's get back to Lumberjack for now. We'll add this custom driver later so that we can add back the messages component. For now, let's structure these logs using some of the other APIs, the declarative APIs of Lumberjack. Yeah, I guess the first one is, instead of passing in an object literal, we could use a factory service from Lumberjack. We would add it here, log factory. It's called Lumberjack log factory. And with that, we don't need the Lumberjack time service anymore, so it takes care of that. Let's call it log factory. This log factory is using the builder pattern to create log objects. So let's comment out this one for reference. We would still call the Lumberjack service.log, but now we would use the log factory to create, let's say, I guess we couldn't use it in this case because now you need to know which level of log would you want to create. I guess then it would be, but yeah, it's not a good fit for this use case because this is such a generic logging method. But in principle, you could do this just to see how it works. If level is Lumberjack level trace, we will use log factory create trace log, and it accepts the message. And we want to add scope. That was hero service. Then we call .build in the end. That will output a log object, a Lumberjack log. And let's finish this ternary expression. If it's not a trace level, it's an error level. We know that for sure in our code right now. This is not pretty code at all, but I just want to show off the log factory here. So it also accepts the message, and we want to pass it a scope of hero service and call .build. So notice that now we don't need the Lumberjack time service. That is integrated into the Lumberjack log factory. So whenever build is called, a timestamp is being created. Okay, we've been live for an hour now. I'll continue a bit more. The next step is, rather than all of this is still low level. The log factory is a bit more convenient than object literals, except if you have to be very generic or dynamic like we do in this case, then it's not really a good fit. But what we really want to use here is what we prefer in the Lumberjack team, the NG workers, is this one called the Lumberjack logger, not log, but logger. But this is actually a base class. So to use this, we should actually create a new class here. Let's call this the hero.logger. So we will import from the worker Lumberjack log. There's a lot of Lumberjack logging some things, but here's the Lumberjack logger. Now we can do an injectable, and we will provide it in root. We will export this class, that is the hero logger, and it extends the Lumberjack logger base class. What we want to do now, we want to add a method per log we had here in the hero service. So let's find the first one. This one, fetched heroes. Okay, I'll just split the screen like so. So we're going to need one here, and this is a trace level. So we will start by saying this dot. Oh, yeah, the name. Fetched heroes. Let's call that. Fetched heroes is this dot create trace logger. The message. So it's similar to the logger Lumberjack log factory. It uses the builder pattern, but rather than returning an object literal, a log object, it's returning a method that can be called to ship the log to Lumberjack. So now we need this message. And we also needed the scope, hero service, and we call .build. And now this is actually a method. And there's some typing that it might look a little strange here, but when you're using it, it will make sense. It's to support this payload, because we could say here, we always want to add an object with, what could it be, like country and a string. And if we did that, we would have to say, probably has to extend Lumberjack payload. I'm not doing it right. We would have to do it something like this. Hero payload extends Lumberjack payload, log payload. I don't know. We don't need a payload here, but yeah. Country, for example. Then we could say this hero logger will have a hero payload. And if we do that, we should say with payload. And now we have to pass in this country, Denmark, right? Did I really do something wrong? Oh, generic is here. Yeah, now it's working. Okay. And if I misspell it, it'll be unhappy. Yeah, but we don't really need a payload now. We do need the scope, but we'll remove this payload. And then we need to remove the type. So Lumberjack types are helping us here. So now we can, let's start by replacing this one. We want to inject the heroes logger. So let's make this larger. We can now remove the Lumberjack service. I guess not yet. So let's start by adding this hero logger. And here in the first place where we're logging, now we will call this dot hero logger dot fetch heroes. And that's it. And you're asking, is there any chance my stream can be full HD? Maybe if you find it on YouTube. It's usually HD. I'm using StreamYard. I think I currently have a paid license, but maybe not the subscription. Maybe the subscription is not expensive enough for HD. I need to figure out a solution for this. But let me find a YouTube link for you, and that should be full HD. So maybe that's an option. Here is the YouTube URL. I'll leave it in for a second, and you can try that out. Or I can zoom in, but it'll get a little annoying. But yeah, let me know. I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so that was the first one. And as you can see here, now we're just calling a method, and it will do all the work of creating this log object with the message and the scope. 720p on YouTube as well. Well, maybe my license expired. Yeah. Well, sorry about that. I'm trying to find a free option. So I'm trying to find maybe a solution with OBS, but it's a lot of work to set all of this up. Usually, at least after the stream has ended, it'll be in full HD on the YouTube recording. So hopefully that's still an option, but maybe it's my StreamYard license that's back to the free one by now. I thought it would be a couple of weeks, but I don't know. I mean, I can zoom in a bit more, but then we'll have only like 10 lines of code. That's also a bit annoying. So hopefully you can see it here. Otherwise, I will, the recording afterwards should be full HD, and I will make sure to publish this repo on GitHub so that you can look into the code yourself and fork it and try it out. Okay, so we are only calling a method here, and that does all the whole work of setting up this log object with all the properties and passing it to the Lumberjack service. So all of that happens now behind this method. We don't have to care about the implementation. In fact, we don't even have to care about whether it's Lumberjack. Technically, this is now a facade for logging. So Lumberjack could be switched out, and this logger service could still have the same API, since it's just a method. So Lumberjack could be switched out by replacing it with another base class that calls another logging API. So this is kind of neat because now when we get rid of these two dependencies, our service class here won't have any dependencies, at least not directly to Lumberjack. So it's sort of nice to get like abstract Lumberjack away from most of your application. Anyways, let's find the next logging method here. It's this one. Okay. So let's add that to the hero logger. This is also trace, and it's either fetched or did not find. This is a hero. Okay, so this is a bit more complicated. This is a parameterized log. I'm trying to figure out a name here. The service is called getHero no 404. Get hero by ID, return undefined when ID not found. What's a good name for this? Either it's fetched, did not find. I can't think of a name. Fetched hero with ID. Oh, this one was fetched heroes. How about try fetch hero? And this one accepts a hero object, so we'll do that as well. And let's copy this logic here, this business logic, for a second. If H for hero, let's just expand it to the full name hero. It also needs an ID, actually. I guess that's wouldn't that be on the hero? Or maybe not if it's not found. This is a bit of a strange one. ID string hero, which might be, oh, this typing doesn't make sense. Oh, it's not a string, it's a number. The type is hero, but we're looking for the truthiness, so it could be undefined, I guess it says here. Yeah, so either hero or undefined. So let's see here. Let's say here outcome. Okay, so we'll actually generate the message. Good. And then we'll do this create. Still a trace, isn't it? Yeah, trace with this message. And we still want the hero service. Scope. Now build. And just to demonstrate here, this is the logger method. So to complete this, we will have to call it like so. So that's a little clear. So this is a parameterized log or logger method. We might introduce an API addition that makes this a bit more convenient at some point in the future, but for now, we're happy that it's at least possible to do. So yeah, let's try to use this. So here in tab, we'll say this.hero logger, try fetch hero, pass the ID and the hero, or H, they call it for some reason. Like so, yeah. So this is our logging. Really wants it to have a type signature. Okay, it returns void. Good. That was the second one. There's a question here from Musamil. Okay, so is state management really needed or best practice for better performance in Angular for both smaller and bigger applications? Okay, I guess it depends on how you look at it, because state management, if you consider something like Nginx Store, or other options like NGXS or Rx Angular, it's actually, it also, like, one of the main reasons for having a library for that, one of them, there's multiple, but one of them is it creates a caching layer, so that you don't have to make the same requests many times if the data is not changing very often. So you don't have to hit the API the next time you need to access the same data. For example, if you already fetched that data less than an hour ago and your data is not changing that often. Of course, you need to invest heavily in designing the state management, even when using a library or a framework for state management. So it's not something that's like, it's not for free, especially not with something like Nginx Store. It takes some heavy investment to design your global store. It's a bit easier with something like Nginx Component Store or Rx Angular State, but that's for local stores. So it can be local to a component, but it can also be shared between components, and then it becomes a shared state service, also with caching built in. And it's a bit easier to learn and reason about. Is it better for performance? Yes. If you do it right, you will cache a lot of requests, effectively giving you an in-memory database or document store for all the state that lives on your server, but you have already fetched it, so you don't need to do it one more time. So in that case, yeah, it does affect the performance of your application. Is it needed? Is it best practice? It also depends on your needs and your team. If you're not familiar with a state management library, you'll have to invest some time to learn it. But again, something like Nginx Component Store or Rx Angular State is relatively simple to learn. It's more of a replacement for something like a service with a subject or multiple subjects, but it doesn't have all the foot guns that implementing your own service with a subject does. So yeah, I would definitely recommend looking into state management solutions, but maybe start with the simpler ones like Nginx Component Store or Rx Angular State. But I mean, if your team is familiar with Nginx Store, go for that. But again, even Nginx Component Store and effects versus components, or sorry, Nginx Store and effects versus Nginx Component Store, it solves a bit of different use cases. So there's some nuances to it. And you are suggesting NGXS. I also like that. It seems very similar to a lot of the APIs in Angular itself. It relies heavily on decorators, which is a personal turnoff for me. But it's a very nice library. The only complaint I have is it's using decorators, which is a non-standard experimental feature of TypeScript that could be removed in any version of TypeScript or changed or broken. But of course, Angular itself uses it. But the difference there is Angular uses it as annotations for the compiler, so it isn't really used at runtime. But that is the case of NGXS. That uses the decorators as runtime, so that's actually a decorator, not an annotation at that point. Yeah, I hope that gave you some idea. Yeah, it is best practice to use state management. At the same time, you should ask yourself, like, how small is my application? What's the lifespan of that application? How many developers will be using it? And how comfortable am I with doing something like service with a subject? Or can I just call the HTTP web API directly? Is that good enough for my use case? Well, then you don't really need state management. But for big or for complex applications, for data that is shared across huge parts or many parts of your application, state management becomes interesting very quickly. Also, if you have a lot of teams working on the code base or people joining and leaving the company often, like contractors, it's very nice to say we're using Nginx Store or whatever, NGXS or Akita. Then there's a good chance that they know it already, or at least they can go look it up in the documentation. So it's also about having patterns that are familiar to a lot of people. Okay, back to back to Lumberjack. We actually managed to, at least it compiles, we created this parameterized logger method. So when we call this hero logger try fetch hero, we pass it the ID and the hero object, and it has the same logic as before to create the logged message. We're creating a trace log, and it has the scope of hero service. Let's look for the next log call here. This one is fetched hero with an ID. So let's call this copy this one actually. No, this takes an ID parameter, so we need another one of those parameterized logs. Fetched hero with an ID, which is a number. It's a void returning method. Okay, return. No. Logger is this create trace logger with the message of like so. Fetch hero with ID. Now we want the same scope. Hero service. And build that returns the logger. Now we need to call it like so. And I know this is using a different style than the other ones. And yeah, that's why we might want to come up with a more convenient API for these parameterized loggers. We could also turn this into a method under prototype rather than a property, which is a function. But let's leave that for now. It's at least it's simple. What is it unhappy about? Oh, exactly, because it's an instance field and not a prototype method. Okay, do we really have to do this your way? Okay, let's do that. Now we also have the same style being used, but we'll have to do this again. Like so. Alternatively, but call it, but it's a bit strange looking. You have to think about it for a second to realize what's going on. So let's use the same style across the logger methods here. That was fetched hero. Let's add that here. hero logger, fetched a hero with this ID. Good. And oh, now we have two logs. So this is actually, again, another parameterized log. The message is based on X, which is an array of heroes. So we could have two log methods, but they are really related. So I would prefer we have them in one logger method here. So it would be parameterized again. And what should we call it? Heroes matching. Yeah, let's call it that. Heroes matching. And we need both a term, which is a string, a search term, and we need an X. Let's call it heroes, which is an array of heroes. And this returns void. So let's create our logger here internally. It's another trace logger. Now the message will depend on the length of this heroes array. So let's create the message first. If heroes.length, and it will be found heroes matching the search term. So that means let's make it a little clearer. Let's say if heroes length is bigger than 0, found heroes matching, and if it is 0, the message will be no heroes matching the search term. So now we have a message, and we can add the scope, again hero service, and we can build the logger and finally call it. Good. So here we can say this.hero logger, heroes matching, and pass it the search term and the heroes array. Right. Oh, they call it X here, so we'll just use that name again. Right. Few more to go. Added hero. Okay, we'll create an added hero logger. And it needs, let's see, this one has a new hero, a hero object, but really we're only using the ID, which is a number. So let's just go with that. ID, number, void. First we create the logger. So trace logger has this message that we'll copy. And here we'll just use this ID, and we'll add the scope. It's again hero service. Build it. Now we have the logger. Let's call it. And over here in our service, we will now use this one. Hero logger, added hero, new hero.id. So, great. Oh, it's not happy. TypeScript is not happy. Why is it not showing up here then? Number. That's kind of strange. Let's try running it again. Come on, TypeScript. Make us happy. Added hero does not exist on type hero logger. Oh, I probably didn't save it. Here we go. Yeah, now it's happy. Good. We have just a few to go. Deleted hero. Okay, we'll add a deleted hero logger. And it accepts the ID of the hero. So we'll create a logger. It's a trace logger. And it has this message. Which depends on the ID. And we add the scope. Hero service. Build it. Now we have a logger. And we call it. And I saved it, so now I can do this.hero logger dot deleted hero, pass it the ID, and that's it. Now we have structured logging, and we're needing this one, updated hero. This one is missing. Let's add it here, updated hero, and it needs the ID of that hero. A number returns void. It's another trace. So we create the logger, create trace logger, and the message, ID, scope, hero service, and we'll, don't worry, we'll find a nice solution for this scope in a second. And we'll do build, call the logger, and now save it. Call it from here, hero logger, updated hero, and the ID of that hero, like so. Okay, down here, this is an error log. Some operation failed. That operation, it's some string. Okay. So, well, yeah, I mean, this could be a generic error log, but here, like it doesn't seem to be specific to the hero service except for the scope, but we'll put it in the hero logger as well. Operation failed. Accepts an operation, which is defaults to just a string operation, but it can be any string. And now that's, since that has a default parameter, we can't have that be first because we'll need a message as well, an error message. String, and we'll create this logger, which is an error logger. And it has this message. Error message with the scope of hero service, and build it. Now we have logger, we can call it. And we should be able to use that over here. This dot hero logger dot operation failed. Pass it error message. Oh, any. They used error.message before, so I'll also use that. Yeah, like so. Okay. And now we can get rid of this generic log method. And in the constructor, we can delete everything from Lumberjack. we'll leave the message server service since we will be adding a custom log driver for that one. I have been streaming now for an hour and a half, so it won't be today because it's 1 a.m. in Denmark, so I'll be ending soon. Let's do that next time. Let's add a custom log driver for the message component, which uses the message service. For now, let's see if we can get this working. What did we change in app module? Oh, this in-memory thingy. So we will commit these two files, the hero service changes, the hero logger class, add, use hero logger. And now the benefit is that we have, well, first we've abstracted Lumberjack away from our service. So there is no direct dependency on Lumberjack. We just have this facade service hero logger that could switch out the implementation to something other than Lumberjack if we really wanted to. But also we have an overview here of the different logged events that can happen. A hero can be added, a hero can be deleted, a hero can be fetched, heroes, plural, can be fetched. We can search for heroes matching a search term. We have an operation that failed. We can try to fetch a hero and either have an outcome of fetched or did not find. And we can, it can happen that a hero was updated. So we have an overview here of the events that are logged. So that's pretty nice. And the service here that is logging doesn't have to add all the implementation details for Lumberjack or whatever logging system it's using. It's just calling these methods, some of which, or many actually in this case, has parameters. Let's see if this works. The application is still running. Good. Hello there. Here it is. Let's reload it. Okay. So an error occurs. Yeah, this is a bit strange because of this in-memory web API. Because now I can't get my data because it's using this mocked API, which I disabled, because otherwise it wouldn't it wouldn't log to this backend. A few seconds ago. Okay, so this was logged. This was probably the error. Yeah, get heroes failed. Okay, let's try to add back in app modules. Let's add back this in-memory web API. Let's do it this way instead. Revert the changes. And now it's back with the right imports. And now we can see in the console instead whether the events are being logged. So let's reload the application. And let's see, go to dashboard. So a trace, fetched heroes, undefined, but the HTTP service is failing for these events that are logged. But that's expected since adding that in-memory web API kind of disables, it proxies all the HTTP calls being made by this application. So we have a trace here, fetched heroes, the scope of hero service. Let's go to Nacho. And now we have fetched hero with ID of 12. Go back. and fetched heroes again. So it's working as before, but this time through a logger service. Okay, you have a few comments for this. Let's see. Musamil, it's 3 a.m. in Dubai. Okay, thank you for staying up late. This is what I end up doing sometimes as well. You have a meeting tomorrow. I think you should get some rest before that meeting. I'll end very soon, and you can get some sleep, and me as well. I have to get up and stay with my family tomorrow. It's holidays, but we're doing some activities. Thank you for the nice comments. And oh no, you're saying hero service is like a CROT service. Would it make sense to extract it into an abstract, make the service include a logger with its logger counterpart? Yeah. If you have an application that has many of these resources, I guess you could extract a generic CROT service with logging built in. Yeah, that could make sense for sure. And then you're saying in this way we'd write a logger only once. Yeah, you're right. You could create a CROT logger and a CROT service that's more generic that uses that logger class. Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, so the application is still working. So we already committed. Okay. Yeah, that's a nice change. There's not a lot of implementation details about logging. It's just calling a message or a method and passing the parameters it needs to figure out the log message and so on. And in handle error, we now have this operation failed. And if we had a real API, we could both fetch the heroes, and when an operation fails, it would be forwarded to this backend as we saw. We saw it working when we disable the in-memory web API. This error message is still is then working. Yeah. So I don't know if Bman is still around, but if you watch it later, you did have a request for a custom formatting function. Let's just try that out real quick, and that'll be the last thing. Okay, so the Lumberjack module comes with an option called format. So it's a function that takes a log, Lumberjack log, and returns a string. So this is what we need to return, and we have all these log properties. Let's just find the default one. I'll find that in the code of Lumberjack. Just give me a second. And we'll expand that. Oh yeah, there's one more thing I want to do before we end. We'll do that after. The log.scope, log.level, UTC's timestamp for let's do new date, and then the timestamp is this number ticks from that timestamp created at, and we'll do to ISO string, or no, let's do to UTC string. Formatted scope, we have that above, and then the log message. And now bman wants an emoji. We'll add that to the scope. And we'll do B. We'll do bman, like so. That will be included in the scope. Let's do the ISO string. Then we get the local time zone as well. Let's see if this works. Let's reload, see what we get. Go to Nacho. And now we see the formatted string changed. And that also goes for what would have been logged here to the backend. Because the formatted log is also passed to the backend in case the log provider is using that for something. But it should have everything it needs and all these properties. So this is more for convenience and consistency. Okay, so bman, you got your emojis, the bman emojis. And one last thing here is I mentioned that we were repeating. Well, let's just commit this feed custom log formatter. And as you can see here, we're repeating this with scope, which is always hero service for all of these logs that are logged through the hero logger. So rather than having to repeat that, we did create a convenience-based class called the Lumberjack scoped, or the scoped Lumberjack logger. So if we extend that instead, we'll have to create a public property called scope. And now we can delete this with scope call from all these logger builders. So we don't have to repeat ourselves. We can override it, like so, if we want to. But the idea is you're using the same scope for every logger method, or almost all of them at least. So now we got rid of that duplication. So it's just the log level, the log message, and build it to get a logger. Yeah. Refactor use the scoped Lumberjack logger. Okay. I will publish this repo to my GitHub profile so that you can all get a hold of it. I'll also leave it in the description for the YouTube recording. And there's a final question here from All Knows. Any plans to make an in-depth Nx course or stream series exploring command line best practices? Maybe build a very simple but complete full stack with Angular and Nest. For that, I would suggest you look up bman's episodes. He is all about Angular, Nest, and Nx. He created his own tool chain called Nx PM. But let me try to find him here. This is his channel on YouTube. I don't know if there's a convenience URL, but it looks like so. So you can also search for bman on YouTube. You should be able to find him. And in here, like he has 30 episodes at this point, and it's about Nest and Angular and Nx and Tailwind, Lumberjack, and Nginx component store, a bunch of other stuff. And if we go to playlists, this is in Danish, but it says playlist. There's one about Nx Workspaces. There's 3 episodes with me and B-Man, and I guess one more by, let's see, who's that? It's from Preston Lamb about Nx Workspace for GitHub Action. But these first 3 ones are how to structure an Nx Workspace. And it's been a while since we recorded it, but I think it was B-Man already created a full stack application with Nest and Angular, and we were trying to structure that to a more conventional Nx workspace structure. So yeah, I can recommend that. And I recently, this week, I republished my Angular tutorial series, how to set up an Nx style monorepo workspace with the Angular CLI. So this is using the Angular CLI, yes, but you will learn about how to structure a workspace properly because it builds on the concepts of Nx. It just needs a bit more work because Angular CLI is very powerful and flexible, but of course Nx comes with some conventions built in and some generators for that. But you can do the same with Angular CLI with a bit of manual configuration. But in this series, we go and build like a pretty big, it is just Angular applications, but there's actually 4 of them and a bunch of different 2 domains and a shared domain seed map, and these 2 check-in and booking domains that are for each of these applications, and then the shared domain that's used between them. Many types of libraries. There's application projects, there's a data access library, feature libraries, shell libraries, environments library, UI library, a utility library. Like there's not a lot of code or implementation inside of these libraries. This tutorial is more about learning the structure of an Nx workspace. And you can find it on dev community. I have a couple of publications. One of them is called This is Angular. So you should be able to find it. So with those 2 resources, you should be good. Look into other videos by B-Man. He created this NXPM toolchain, nxpm.dev. And that is like full stack toolchain with code generation using Nest, Angular, Prisma, GraphQL, and Nx. Yeah, I think it's something like that. And I think he calls it the Pang stack. So yeah, check that out for sure. You can get a full stack workspace set up. You can set up an open source library with release commands and so on. It has a bunch of these schematics. Let's see this one, for example. Yeah, look into NXPM and all his videos, B-Man. There's a lot of great content out here. Here's some about Nest.js, Angular, and Prisma. So yeah, check that out. You were asking specifically whether I would do anything about it. Maybe. I have a lot of things, activities going on, so I won't promise anything. This Angular After Dark is whatever I feel like that day. I'm currently focusing on some other efforts primarily, so this is just from time to time. But yeah, we'll probably touch Nx at some point. So stay tuned on this channel, or currently it's my name, and just search for Angle After Dark. There's a playlist with all of these episodes on YouTube. But I don't have anything in particular planned for about Nx. That's all for today. After 2 hours, I hope you learned something. I definitely enjoyed sharing Lumberjack and how to add it to an existing Angular application. Lumberjack is a structured approach to logging, and it's configurable. And I'll probably do another episode where we add a custom log driver to output the logs to that messages component again, while still using the same logger service. So our service code calling the log methods will not have to change, but the configuration will have to change so that we can add our own custom log driver. But that's really neat that we can switch out the configurations, the log drivers, the global configuration. And now that we have abstracted the logging implementation details away from this service, we could even change the logging level or the logging message without having to touch the service itself, because it shouldn't really care about logging. It should just say, I want this event to be logged, and whatever the implementation details, you can deal with that. And so this is a nicer way, a more structured approach to logs. And at the same time, we abstracted away Lumberjack itself from most of the code base, which is pretty sweet as well. So enjoy yourselves. Have a nice rest of the week, and I'll see you maybe in the next episode for setting up this custom log driver for Lumberjack. That's all for now. Bye.